5 AM. Excited this morning. You may not look it because it's just after 5 in the morning, but I'm going home. And not only am I going home, I'm going home for 5 days. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, sir. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Car is ready.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to have some tea coffee with you?
No, I'm fine, thank you. Good morning.
So we're going to the airport now.
Yes, please. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How about you?
Good. One of the benefits of no longer working for a Formula One team is that when you come back from a trip, from the travels, wherever you've been, instead of, as it is with the Formula One team, or certainly was when I was there, instead of going straight into the office or straight into the factory to carry on and get ready for the next race, I do actually go home. I've got the next 5 days where I can be at home, walk the dogs, take the kids to school, see my wife, sleep in my own bed. And those things become more and more precious when you travel as much as I do and have been doing over the last few weeks particularly. So that's why I'm so excited. And this is what I've missed. This is why I love coming home. To hang out with the dogs, to hang out with Claire and of course all the kids. It's what makes it all worth it. You know, when you do all these kind of jobs, and it's the same for anybody who works in Formula One and lots of industries, when you do this kind of stuff and you're away and you're working, even if you're just working in the UK, but you're working late, working long hours, dedicating and sacrificing a lot for your job. You know, I do it partly because I love my job, but of course we all do these things, we all work so that we can reap the benefits of that, whether it's through financial reward, you know, whether you get paid well because you work long hours, or whether it's just being paid to survive, whether it's being able to provide a home and food and all the other things, clothing and all the things you need to keep a family going or a household going. That's why we all do it. So when you do get to come home, you do get to have a little bit of time when you're not working, and you get to spend some time with those people and those things that you love around you, then it's all worthwhile for those moments. And you know, when I was working in Formula One, that's what I used to think. I used to think we're working all these hours, all these days away from home, long spells, and it's for this reason. So when F1's talking about expanding the calendar to 24 or 25 races, which is sounding increasingly likely, that is something we have to bear in mind, because the human toll that can take on a team can be pretty significant. At 21 races, which it is now, that's already being stretched. The human side, which is enormous and by far the biggest side of any team, and a Formula One team no different, the biggest element of that is the human element. And we are already pushing people to the limit. It's a stressful job at times, it's a high pressure job, and it's also a job which means that people have to sacrifice a lot to do it. It's not a 9-to-5 role for most people. It's not even just a job for most people, it's a kind of way of life. If we're going to increase that by more and more races, we put an awful lot more stress on all of those hundreds and thousands of individuals involved. Now I know it's very easy to listen to that and go, oh, stop complaining, you know, I'd give my right arm for a job in a Formula One team. And I know, I get all that. The reality is I don't think you'll find many people in Formula One actually complaining about this kind of thing. Most people, certainly in my experience, do this job not for the money, in reality, because if you really boil it down, they're not super well paid. They're not being paid for the amount of time and dedication they give to this role. They do it because they love Formula One. They're passionate about motor racing and they're competitive. You know, they want to win. They want to do the best they can. That's why they do the role. And I don't think you'll hear many people complaining about the situation in Formula One generally. But as an outside commentator now, I'm just giving my opinion that Formula One as a whole needs to be mindful of the human toll that they could take by just increasing the number of races consistently to bring in more money for the overall pot. The thing is, for the organisers of a Formula One Grand Prix, for Liberty for example, the profit that comes with every race, with every Grand Prix, is more or less, in very general terms, a set profit per Grand Prix. You know, they have a cost associated with staging a race, but they can increase the income that comes from all of that because of race hosting fees, TV broadcasting fees, all of the other things, sponsorship deals, things that go with that. They can bring in a certain amount of profit per race. But for the teams, of course, large part of their income comes from prize money at the end of a season. Now that doesn't really matter how many races are involved in that season. They still, you know, only have a certain finishing position in the championship at the end of whether it's 16 races or 25 races, and therefore their prize pot is divided up at the end of the season depending on where they finish. So for them, the costs, both in terms of financial, because for a team to actually go to a Grand Prix is a huge cost, as you can imagine. And I know they can offset some of that by perhaps adjusting their rate card for sponsorship, for example, given that there'll be an extra race worth of exposure from those sponsors. But sponsorship in Formula One now is nothing like what it used to be. And actually, rate cards in general have been absolutely slashed over the last few years. So sponsorship's not a huge part of a Formula One team's income for many teams. The cost of flying their people around the world is still the same. Putting them up in hotels, of course, flying the freight all over the world to these new Grand Prix venues is still a cost that is, you know, burdened by the teams. And for every extra race that they do, those costs go up, of course. And the next stage of that, which we're very close to now at 21 Grand Prix, is that teams need to start rotating staff, because it's just physically not possible for everybody to do 25 Grand Prix in a season. You know, you will start suffering burnout, people will start collapsing, and you know, you can't have that. You have to look after your people because they are the lifeblood of your team. So then if you start increasing the numbers of people, that's additional cost again, more salaries. You know, we'll get to a point where we'll need to have a second team in each of the teams to be able to rotate them for certain Grand Prix, so not everybody does every race. And that's fine for the big teams. Of course, we used to do all that sort of thing. We used to have a completely separate test team in Formula One where each of the teams, certainly the big teams, and I was part of this at McLaren when I started, we had a completely separate team of people, a whole team of mechanics, engineers, truckies, the whole lot, sets of equipment. We had our own cars, trucks, garage setup, and we would constantly be going around the world totally independently of the race team, running tests every week. And that was slashed in, 2009 was it? You know, for the exact purpose of cutting costs. And even then you've got this issue that not everybody can be rotated. You can't have people like the team principal only doing certain races and certain key operational stuff. The driver's race engineers, that's a crucial relationship that has to be there at every Grand Prix to get the best out of car and driver. You can't have that relationship changing from one Grand Prix to the next if you want to be the most consistent, most productive, and ultimately get the best results out of your Formula One team. So it's very easy to say, well, let's just get some more people in and start rotating staff, and that works for lots of people, but certainly not for everybody. I even remember this kind of thing being discussed when I was at McLaren. So even before the summer break was brought into the regulations, when we didn't have that many races, but we were running non-stop throughout the season without any gaps in the middle. And I remember at the time the team talking about, you know, rotating members of staff, and I remember thinking at that time, look, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but I don't want to miss a race. You know, this is my car. I'm in charge of this car. I put my blood, sweat and tears into making this car as good as it can possibly be, as fast as it can be. I don't want to then hand it over to somebody else to take responsibility for at 1 or 2 races of a season just so I can get a break. You know, I'd rather have had time off in between races, and that actually is what most teams have now gone towards, giving teams and mechanics and engineers some time off in between Grand Prix as best they can. And some of the bigger teams are able to use factory staff to turn around the cars in between races, so the mechanics, the race team mechanics, can just kind of strip the car on a Sunday night at the racetrack, send it back to the factory. A team of people will then pick up the bits and do most of the turnaround before the race team can then come back in and put the thing back together with all its new parts and sub-assemblies. So that's the model that they've gone to now. But I clearly remember having this strong feeling of not wanting to miss, you know, even just one Grand Prix, because I was so passionate about what we did. I was so competitive and wanted to be in control of this thing that I was in control of for most of the season. I didn't want to relinquish that for just a small part. So there's still that element as well. You have to sort of probably force this upon teams to some extent, because lots of them just will not want to do that. You know, the inbuilt passion for Formula One that they all have inside won't just let them volunteer for it. So the rule makers are probably the ones that need to step in and create some kind of rule that enforces this upon teams.
Wish I hadn't walked that far.